Okay, we are back. There's some buzzing that I didn't love, so I'm changing the light mood. It's your good friend Lukie, and I'm here with my co-host Dakota, and we're going to be breaking down Ryan Garcia versus Mario Barrios. How excited are you, buddy?
I'm like moderately excited about this fight. I mean, listen, it's obviously a champion who's coming off of 2 draws against guys that maybe aren't even in the top 10, against a guy who is coming off of an upset loss to Rolly Romero. And I think they're also 2 guys that have, boxing fans engaged, right? Ryan Garcia is one of, if not the most famous young fighter to young people. And I think that Mario Barrios is a guy more my age, but he's from an era, the PBC era. He was fighting big notable names like Gervonta Davis, Keith Thurman, getting the win over Yordenis Ugas. He was a part of a certain era. And so I do think while it's not like if I was making my 10 dream matchups, that's probably not going on it. But I do think that there's a level of intrigue to this matchup because they're also very contrasting. No, we can hear you, Bub. And I love that you got the in-show lolly going.
I am going in-show lolly. That's old school player on him.
What are you, Jorge Arce, bro?
Old school player status, doing the lollipop during the show. Why don't you break down the matchup before, or do you want me to do my breakdown?
Well, I feel like just to break down the matchup itself, I think that the contrast is in some of what we were talking about just a couple hours ago, right? It's like the obvious athletic gifts, and I think explosive power, explosive athletic attributes obviously go to Ryan Garcia. But there's also an inconsistency to what you're going to get with him. You could get the Devin Haney fight. You could get the Rolly Romero fight. You could get the Luke Campbell fight. You don't really know what you're getting with Ryan, right? He's a little bit of a wild card. He's not entirely reliable. With Mario, the ceiling may not be as high as it is for Ryan, but I'm pretty confident that I know what I'm going to get. I'm going to get a guy who uses a jab pretty well, who gets into exchanges at times and gets hit, but is generally pretty responsible about using his range, has a certain punch output, and has also fought top opposition that is his size. And Ryan's still newer to welterweight. So just to set the table, I guess I lean towards Mario, to be honest, even though I feel like Ryan Garcia at his absolute best is a more explosive, talented fighter than Barrios. Just feels like right at this moment that's where it's headed.
Yeah, I don't know where to. There's a lot to unpack, and I'm going to do some Christmas or gift birthdaying, and I'm going to unpack for the people.
Valentine's Day, if you will.
Valentine's Day, because we're doing the show on Valentine's, because boxing is our Valentine, right? And one of the things is there's an element of a former coach. Ryan Garcia was trained by Joe Goosen. Joe Goosen now trains Mario Barrios. That's happened in the history of boxing, but it appears to rub Ryan the wrong way. That's been something at the press conference that he brought up multiple times, etc. Another element, like you hit on, is training. What is the training situation with Ryan? There's been a lot of talk about that he's doing streams in living rooms. We haven't seen a ton of gym footage. He's training with his father. Barrios has always been someone that trains hard. He's training now with Goosen and that squad of guys.
Am I right too in saying that he missed like a weight check-in, right?
I have no clue. I haven't done any research, so I don't feel comfortable saying that, but I have no idea. And I don't feel like doing research. I've been driving so much this morning that I just don't want to do research.
Well, I without giving, I just think it's relevant to what you're saying. But according to your outlet, Boxing Scene, he did in fact miss a WBC weight check-in and was fined. So he's already
okay. So I mean, and that just adds like what you'd say suspicion of like how serious is this training camp? Because like just going a monologue with a fighter like Ryan Garcia, you hit it on the head, right? He enters boxing with some gifts that most people don't have, right? Now, you have to harness those gifts to get the most out of them, but he's going to have faster hands, all things being equal, than someone else who starts boxing. Like, he's got some physical tools, some coordination that other people don't have. That being said, it's a little scary for me that he's not putting himself around young, motivated fighters that want to one day be in his position. I think that one of the hacks when you get to that high level is to have people that really want to be in your position, that are younger than you, that push themselves hard, who are motivated, that help make the camp as hard as possible, to push it. And meanwhile, I think Barrios' genius has been, he knows his identity as a fighter. He's got a really hard right hand. He's got good distance. He's always been big for the size. And the guys that have beaten him have been kind of those elite guys. And I think the big question of the fight is, we don't know if Ryan Garcia is elite. We know he has elite attributes, but we don't know if he's elite. He had an elite moment against Devin Haney, and that might be a matchup thing. And against Barrios, this is the moment where we kind of learn about
giant asterisk on it, by the way. The win over, because it's not a win. It is technically,
it's a no contest. But I think this is what's interesting to me about this fight is Garcia is probably in his prime. He's fighting a fighter who's coming off of 2 lackluster draws, but he's very solid. And you can't really handicap the fight because you don't really know. Like, I think that there's a world where Barrios takes Garcia to the second half. And what if he starts hitting him to the body? How does he respond to body shots? How does he respond to when the fight? The thing I remember about the Rolly fight was, how did he respond to that second half of the fight when things weren't going well? It didn't look like he really had the urgency in it. There's a lot of things we're going to learn about both fighters. I think Barrios has established himself as a credible guy of this era. He wins some and loses some, but he's established himself. But for Garcia, this is really his moment to prove he's a championship level fighter that merits the attention of the stardom he gets based on popularity. You got to unmute.
One scenario that I've kind of thought of that it seems very plausible to some extent is like, much like in the Luke Campbell fight, right, where I think the thinking was sort of similar in that fight, where it's like Ryan's the more explosive guy, but we know what we're getting with Campbell. We know that there's a certain quality there. So we're using Campbell as the measuring stick. And Campbell was winning that fight. If I'm not mistaken, he had gotten a knockdown. I mean, he had had a nice series of rounds, and Ryan's power and explosiveness bailed him out, right? And so maybe that power and explosiveness was helping to cover up other things at that point in his career. And is he still powerful and fast enough and explosive enough to have an exciting moment bail out 8-9 bad rounds?
Questions around VADA testing for this fight. I don't have an official answer on that, but I would assume that VADA testing has been involved because it's a WBC fight, and WBC has always been VADA. It's just interesting because I think the interesting part of it is Ryan Garcia got to a level kind of like Edgar Berlanga and some of these other guys where the fame eclipsed the accomplishment. And it's a very modern scenario of kind of celebrity boxers who haven't achieved a world title but are more popular than other fighters based on being cool or attractive or a flashy style. And this is kind of a crossroads fight. No one's talking about it, but for Garcia, this is a crossroads fight. And for Barrios, this is, this kind of turns him into a different level of fighter if he wins this. I think people are looking at him potentially losing this and thinking of him as a high-level gatekeeper, a good story as a 2-division title holder, but they're not. I think a lot of people are underestimating him. If he wins this, his career arc changes, I think.
I think it also depends on how Ryan looks. Like if he beats a version of Ryan Garcia that looks engaged in the fight, I think that there's a lot of merit in that. I think if Ryan looks as disconnected as he did from the Rolly fight, I think you have to frame the win in a certain light. You know what I mean? You're fighting a guy who's no longer engaged in his own craft. I just think I do think to some extent it depends on how he wins and how Ryan looks.
Your gut feeling is Barrios right now?
I think that's my gut feeling, but again, like I said, if the things that make Ryan Garcia special bail him out after rounds of losing, that wouldn't surprise me either. But it just seems like Barrios, having been a welterweight for much longer, having fought at 140 for much longer, Ryan went blow weight at 140 welterweight. He was a lightweight before that. So I do think that size and weight classes matter. And I think that Barrios has, despite maybe a more slender frame, also something we were talking about, I think that he's a naturally bigger guy that isn't going to be phased or intimidated by Garcia's punching power. He went 12 rounds with Keith Thurman,
Yeah, it is an interesting matchup. It's just, like a lot of things in boxing, you look at this fight and you don't think the winner of this is the best guy in the division. And it's kind of weird because if Garcia were to win, he at one point, not now, held a win over Devin Haney, who I look at as the best guy in the division. Yet it's hard for me to look at either of these guys and compare them to Devin currently.
Yeah, it would be very difficult. But I think that Mario, particularly if he was dominant, would have way more of a claim to that because of the body of work.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now let's go to the co-feature. Your guy, Richardson Hitchins, taking on Oscar Duarte. How do you see this fight stylistically breaking down?
Listen, I think Duarte is a really solid pressure fighter that does that thing about as well as you can do it. There's been little improvements defensively in how he positions his feet, with Robert Garcia. But all that being said, man, his style is kind of tailor-made for Richardson Hitchins, and I feel like particularly right at this moment that this is a style that's tailor-made for Richardson Hitchins. It would really change how I looked at Duarte if he was able to break distance and nullify that jab and crowd Hitchins the way I'm forgetting there was a fighter a few years ago that gave him a
Gustavo Lemos.
Lemos, correct. If he could make it that kind of fight, that would surprise me. And I love the matchup. I love to see two guys in their prime just making a good fight. You love to see it. But I definitely favor Hitchins in this one. I just think he's going to jab the shit out of him. He's going to maintain that distance. He's going to DM-pack the fight, and he's just going to have too many tools.
Yeah, I see the same fight as you. I think a lot of people are looking at that Lemos fight and saying, Hitchins doesn't like pressure fighters, but Hitchins is getting better. The way he looked against Kambosos was very dominant. His win over Liam Paro was dominant. It's a really impressive second after the fight. And he's got something that's really, really hard to have and hard to beat, which is a good jab with good timing. He understands his distance and he understands when to let the shots off, and he catches guys at the end of his punches. I mean, I see the same fight as you. The only way I don't is there's two X factors. What if Duarte turns into Marcos Maidana under Robert Garcia? Maidana had a couple of losses and then kind of reinvented himself with Robert Garcia. And also, Robert Garcia cracked a puzzle that I don't think is the same as Hitchins, and this might make some people laugh. Muratalla, I think, is a better fighter than Duarte, and I think Andy Cruz doesn't have as good of a jab as Hitchins. So I think that there is a comparison that Robert Garcia came up with a game plan, but to get by Hitchins' jab, Duarte is going to eat a lot of clean shots. And it just comes down to, is he willing to accept getting hit by a stinging jab?
He is, by the way. I think he is. I think he's going to be there for it, and I think it's even possible he has moments. The question is, can he do more successfully what William Zepeda was able to do with Shakur, whereas he was able to break that distance from the jump and keep it in close and kind of force Shakur into his style of fight, which Shakur still won. But that's what it's going to take, I think, for Duarte to give himself a chance. He's got to make it an impact fight.
What I'm saying is I get that he's going to do that, but a guy who has such a good jab like Hitchins, those jabs add up. because they're just so well timed, they're well placed, and those cause cuts, those cause swellings, they cause issues in fights. So I just don't see it. And I think I see a lot of people seeing this as a very, very competitive fight. And to me, on paper, I think Hitchins is going to be pretty dominant in this one.
Yeah, I do too. I do too in general. And I think Duarte is a very credible opponent. And I think that the Hitchins is starting to develop a body of work in his own right.
Okay, now let's go over to another fight, which is the next one on the fight, Gary Antuanne Russell versus Andy. I can't say Andy's last name. What are your thoughts on this fight?
I believe it's Andy Hiraoka. I really like Hiraoka's skill set. But Gary Antuanne Russell, man, the last performer, who was the last guy he beat? Did he beat I'm trying to remember.
Rio.
Who was right. That was a tremendous performance, bro. I mean, it really was. And to me, it just feels like his experience level is going to be so different from Hiraoka's, who I've been very impressed with when I've seen him, but I've seen him on like kind of deep cut Japanese undercards where I don't really know the guy he's fighting. I have no idea how he's going to handle the physicality, the power, the sharpness, all the intangibles when you get up to this level. I just don't know. I think it's possible, but we know what we're getting with Gary Antuanne Russell a little bit. And Hiraoka is now starting to get a little older himself. And so how much has he settled into certain habits from being just more talented?
I think you stole my thoughts, basically. I think there's a huge experience gap, and I think Gary Russell hits harder, Gary Antuanne Russell. And it's like when you hit harder and you're an Olympian and you fought like really, really, I think that Antuanne Russell has fought world-class competition. And then our guy Andy over there, I mean, he fought Ismael Barroso, who's a good fighter, but he's a bit older, and he's a bit of a banger. So he's going to be hanging out in front of Antuanne Russell. I think there's a chance that this is going to be like a hipster pick, that this is a good fight, which it is on paper, but I just think the experience gap really could lead to Gary Antuanne Russell having a highlight reel knockout, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know that I view him as that kind of puncher, though. That's the thing. I do think that there's some substance to Hiraoka, but this fight's just going to show us how much of it there is.
I see Antuanne Russell as like an Errol Spence Jr. He beats you down and breaks you down. He might not hit you with one shot. And I think that this is a guy there's substance there, but this is a big level jump. And I just think that when you jump levels and you rely upon physicality and strength, when you try to lean into that against an elite fighter who maybe even hits harder than you, it's going to be tough. That's just my gut feeling.
The other elephant in the room is the inactivity from Hiraoka. I mean, that's part of the reason I kind of forgot about the kid, is he just doesn't fight, and I'm looking at his box rec. It's like he fought 4 times in 2022, but then once in 2023 and once in 2024. His last fight was the Barroso fight in September of 2024. So when you got a young guy like that is not active and taking that level jump, that's a little scary.
Yeah, I just think there's going to be like a contingency of boxing people. They're going to be like, man,
why he's fought so little.
I don't know. That's for people that get paid more than us. But I do think there's going to be like a hipster pick that this is going to be the upset, or there's a chance. I don't see it, man. I think this is going to be a levels thing. And I think Antuanne Russell is going to kind of announce himself in the division with this fight, to be honest.
Well, I don't know that he needs much announcing at this point.
No, but I'm saying, like, I think that he also doesn't fight all that often, and people forget that he's a belt holder. And to be in a perceived 50-50 fight and dominate, I think would be a big statement.
He's a Russell, though, man. They fight once a year.
Is true. Let's go to Frank Martin versus Nahir Albright, a fascinating fight on this undercard. What are your thoughts on this?
Man, I was so impressed with Frank against Bartolome. I know that Bartolome is older and clearly, doesn't quite have the reflexes and the ability to pull the trigger the way he once did. But I don't even remember seeing Bartolome buzzed before that moment. And I thought Frank looked really sharp in that fight. And I think that as much as, you know, the win over Kelvin Davis is a nice win for Albright, I do think that Frank Martin is a legitimate top 10 guy. And I think that Albright's a really solid, skilled gatekeeper that will lose these kinds of fights. That's my thinking on it.
So I'll give you a potential real hot take. Are you ready for the hot take that'll get people mad?
Love a good hot take, bub.
I think they're different level gatekeepers. I think Frank Martin reminds me of Luis Ortiz, a guy that looks the part of a world champion, but may or may not get to that point. And I think Nahir Albright is the guy that works hard and is going to beat the guys that maybe rely on their natural gifts and don't put a strategy in place and just kind of show up assuming they're going to win. But it also feels like there's a ceiling where when he hits a certain tier of opponent, like a Keyshawn Davis, he had moments, but he can't sustain the same success. He knows how to, I'd say he's probably like one of the best guys to bring into a camp to spar elite fighters, but he doesn't necessarily know how to win those fights just yet. And who knows what the reasoning for that is. Maybe he could change that in this fight. But what I expect to see is a tense and tentative fight.
But do you think that Frank is good enough to
Yeah, I think more than likely Frank should win this fight. That I still don't love that inactivity with him. We don't even know how he fits into this weight class just yet. You know, he fought Barthélemy, who's an older guy.
It's quick turnaround, you know. He fought in December, and he's coming back 2 months later. You gotta love that.
Love that. And the thing is, Wu Albright, we know is settled at this weight. We also know what Wu does. He's a boxer puncher, but he's more of a mover. And the question is, what's Frank's identity in this fight? Because if we're looking like if we go Garcia versus Barrios, Frank probably has more gears and more tools. Albright knows who he is. So it really comes down to the identity of Frank Martin because he probably has more ways to win, more things to do. But is he going to be effective in implementing it? And if he can have another great performance, I think he puts himself right there for a title shot.
Yeah, I do too. I thought that Barthélemy performance was explosive enough. And when you lose to a top pound for pound guy, the way he did to Tank Davis, where he was winning some rounds and right in that fight and just got slept the way so many others have, I don't think that's somebody you can just count out.
See, I just don't rate. I never saw Tank as a pound for pound guy because he just didn't have the wins, but that's just me. But he's obviously a very talented fighter. He just didn't, you know, we just don't know where his ceiling was because he didn't have the Devin Haney fight. He didn't have the, you know, he didn't have the Shakur Stevenson, you know, like he beat Ryan Garcia, but we're still in 2026. What was it, 3 years ago?
Yeah.
We're still asking the same question of how good is Ryan. You know, we're asking that, and that's one of Tank's biggest wins. So
because he gives us a different answer every fucking time, you know.
There's a level of inconsistency with a lot of these young fighters. Ryan Garcia, Teofimo Lopez. There's kind of a trend of inconsistency with the social media era fighters. I'm excited because, like, you know, Frank is someone that I think is good for the sport. I think there's a lot of excitement about him. He's built an organic fan base. But Wu Albright has beaten a certain tier of guy. And if he's not capable of doing things, he won't win this fight. So I think it's a really interesting question to be proposed because, you know, Martin looks the part of a world champion at times, but he just hasn't been able to put himself in that position.
Yeah. And but when you get knocked out in a devastating fashion like that, there is an element of a rebuild. For him, that was a long break because the performance against Barthélemy would suggest that the break was enough for him to rebuild, and he's at his best.
I'm going to read to you the rest of the undercard, and you just kind of tell me what fascinates you. We got our guy, Senna Ibako, taking on Beck the Bully. Then we got our guy, Amari Jones, taking on, I believe it's Cuba, Luis Aries. Yep. Joshua Edwards is on the undercard, and that's basically your undercard for this fight card. You know, Amari Jones is my guy, too. Big Amari Jones fan. Solid undercard. You know, pretty decent little card.
I think the thing I'm most interested in is the Melikuzi of Agbekov. Agbeko fight. And I think because Melikuziev has had some good wins against Stevens and then against Fulgham in his last 2 fights, but both decision wins, it's going to be interesting to see how he looks against Agbeko, who has been knocked out quickly in his big fights. And again, it's going to be an opportunity to use Agbeko as a measuring stick for Iglesias. I believe for David Morrell. I believe those were the 2
Yeah,
guys.
yeah. And with Agbeko, the thing with him is he tends to fall into his punches. And the one thing about Beck, too, is Beck tends to fall into his punches. So don't be surprised if this falls into being a really weird, awkward fight.
Yeah, I think it could get really physical and it could turn into a little bit of a wrestling match here and there. But in general, I think of Melikuziev as a pretty big puncher. And if he is doing his version of peaking, this is the kind of fight he should win and probably win by stoppage.
Disappeared for a second. Now I got to get your level of interest for Leigh Wood versus Josh Warrington. I will share my insight. You could tell me they've fought 5 or 6 times, and I'd probably believe you. Like, it just feels like they've fought a million times. I don't know if you feel that way, but like the fight's coming up could be U.S. national pride, but it doesn't really do too much for me because it feels like 2 guys from a different era. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, have they fought? They have fought. That was the one where fucking Warrington was winning and then Wood knocked him out, right? Well, I remember we talked about Josh Warrington on an episode a long time ago, and I think that he is very much a beloved figure over there, right? He's kind of like Nick Ball, where he fights a little dirty, but he's got that everyman thing, and he's had some really exciting moments throughout his career. And to be honest, there hasn't been any one individual performance from him that made me feel like this guy's done or I have no interest in seeing this guy anymore. He's kind of just stayed in the mix. And if anything, I think it's Leigh Wood who I'm a little more concerned about where he's at.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a battle of 2 British fighters that are popular, that are exciting, that could produce a good fight, but I'm not sure where it exists beyond this level. You know, I think it's like, here are 2 good British fighters. They're fighting. It's going to be a moment in the UK. But like, where does this fit into world-class boxing?
But maybe it doesn't. It may not even necessarily need to. I think it's 2 guys who are coming to the end that maybe feel like they have some kind of unfinished business with each other and with their careers. And a win against the other would kind of leave, maybe the stamp they're looking to end on.
Yeah, I guess sometimes I look at a fight like this and I go, okay, how do they do against O'Shaquie Foster? And then I go, well, not good. And that's kind of where I get, a little disappointed. But maybe I shouldn't look at it like that.
This is a Gotti Ward. This is a Brandon Rios, Mike Alvarado. This is that for them.
Yeah, it's 2 guys playing beat 'em up. Undercard is my guy Ishmael Davis taking on Bilal Fawaz. That's my version of the main event. I love that fight, and that's 2 guys that run into each other. Sandy Ryan will return on the undercard. So will Dave Allen, Leo Atong, Molly McCann, and Taya Mai Ayton. Anybody stand out to you there?
I'm just looking through it myself real quick. I mean, this is a fun little card. I think the one that probably would stand out to me is it says that David Allen's going to be on the card, but it doesn't have an opponent for him.
For me, the Ishmael Davis versus Bilal Fawaz fight is just a lot of fun. I think Davis is a really credible top-level gatekeeper. He loses to the guys you'd expect him to, but then when you put him in with an untested guy who's trying to go for the world title, he gives them all the trouble in the world. He's like a real
good, a tough fight too.
Which one?
He gave Josh Kelly a tough fight.
He gives everybody a tough fight, basically. And then he just gave a guy who's fighting Brandon Adams in a title eliminator. I thought he beat him, but he lost a close fight. And then Bilal Fawaz just beat Junaid Boston.
That was a great performance.
And had that great performance. So I love seeing 2 guys that are kind of like the winner of this becomes a dude. This is like the dude Olympics. So I like that.
This is definitely the boxing main event. I don't know if it's the fans' main event.
It's going to be a good fight. Now let's go to Sunday. We got Claressa Shields versus Franchon Crews-Dezurn. It's a rematch. What are your thoughts, Dakota?
To be fair, I have limited interest in this matchup. Obviously, anytime Claressa's fighting, I'm interested. She's the best, most talented female fighter in the world. But in recent years, as she's moved up higher in weight where there's less of a talent base, I'm just increasingly less interested in the matchups that she's in. Franchon, she hasn't fought a lot in recent years. I don't know exactly what weight they're fighting at, but it just feels like everything in this fight favors Claressa pretty clearly getting like a dominant win.
It's just a strange matchup, right? Because Claressa is an interesting figure because it's pretty clear she's the best women's boxer ever, or one of the best. But then she's fighting in this very barren talent pool of women. And then when she fights a Savannah Marshall or a Franchon Crews-Dezurn, she separates in a way where like those fighters then get diminished, or people are like, oh, how good were they? And they don't really go on to do anything else. So it's hard to really like equate what she's doing, because she's a 3-division undisputed champion, but she's done some of the heavy lifting for that in these divisions where the women's boxing is the most shallow. And if we're being perfectly honest, women's boxing in general isn't like the deepest sport to begin with compared to the male counterparts. And she's doing it in divisions where there's literally not that many women that compete at a world-class level.
Well, and especially when there's not that many women that compete at a world-class level, and my friend Shadeja Green has nothing on the schedule, it doesn't really make sense to me why that's not the fight right now.
Well, I think the contrarian would say Crews-Dezurn holds a win over Green, and there's a rematch, and there's some animosity here. It just feels like Shields has become a star, and she's extremely confident. And Crews-Dezurn has just been in this stop-start holding pattern. She got a big win over your friend Shadeja Green. She looked pretty bad against Citlali Ortiz. Some thought she lost that fight. It was not a good performance. And I'm not loving her mentality coming into this fight, to be perfectly honest with you, Dakota. I don't like her talking about the promotion and kind of being frustrated, because none of that wins the fight. So it's feeling as though things outside of the ring are affecting her and the preparation. We'll see how the fight week goes. This is a fight maybe where the week of the fight I get more excited. But I just think that for Salida Promotions and Win Records, they have a superstar in Claressa Shields. And the tough part is they have to come up with matchups that they think will be interesting, and that this is the one they're presenting. And for me right now, it doesn't jump off the page necessarily. Maybe I can talk myself into it. I think part of it is just that last performance with Crews-Dezurn was just not great, and it looked like kind of an end of the road performance. And Shields is a different level than Ortiz.
You got to talk about the inactivity too, bro. I mean, Claressa stays in the ring every 4 to 6 months, and Franchon fights every 18 months. And I don't see how it's a fight that could possibly be competitive.
Yeah, so there we go. And then we'll talk the undercard now, which is Che Kennelly versus Daniel Perkins. Kind of an interesting fight, and I doubt anyone knows much about either of these, or you do. Daniel Perkins fought Claressa Shields, heavyweight, very tall, in her 40s now, but big person, big woman. Che Kennelly had been rumored of fighting Claressa Shields. So this is a former Shields opponent who's big and physical, taking on someone who might fight Claressa in the future. Okay, that's fascinating, because then that kind of gives you, is that an interesting fight, right? Like you can at least look at it and go, okay, where do they stack up? You got Samantha Worthington taking on, trying to make a first defense of an interim title. And then you got the usual suspects on the undercard. You got Price Taylor, DeVille Smith, Atif Olberton, and Garrett Rice, kind of the notable undercard fighters there. Anything stand out to you?
Obviously, always interested in seeing how Price Taylor progresses, but I'm interested in seeing Atif Overton, man. I don't think I've seen him maybe since like I don't remember. Was
The
he in
Fox deal, PBC on Fox.
right? I don't think I've seen him fight in maybe like 3 or 4 years at this point.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see him back. And then finally, we're kind of reversing the curse. We're doing this backwards. Did you catch Dimitri Salita's show this past week on Tuesday where Joshua Pagan had the performance?
Yes, I saw that fight. I also saw the fight between Persoon and hold on, let me switch over so I get her name right.
Caroline Veyre.
Yeah, Caroline Veyre.
Yeah, so let's talk about that card.
I mean, do you want to start with, let's just get the ugly one out of the way, man. I mean, that Veyre and Persoon fight was not a good hang. There's just no way around it. It was a tough hang. It wasn't, in my view, the best officiating job in the world. It felt like Veyre was pretty committed to holding from the beginning. And yet it was Persoon who had the first point deducted. Then he evens it out by taking one away from Veyre. But in the midst of what I would call bordering on like a disqualifying amount of holding, he takes another point from Persoon, who really loses her cool. I mean, I think she had a hard time keeping her cool the whole fight. And I think it's surprising, you know, when you have a champion that's that experienced, but I just don't think she had been used to having somebody that insistent on grabbing her for a minute and a half of every 2 minutes. And she wasn't able to make that adjustment. But I also don't know that there's anything strategic about the way that Veyre was fighting. I think that she was able to do what she was able to get away with.
So for me, what I saw was Veyre has a very amateur style, and she's got to keep you at the end of her punches, but she doesn't sit down, and she kind of falls in, which leads to these clinches because she'd fall in with the shots.
She also reaches for him, bro.
But the big thing I was seeing was like she falls in at times. Her distance is off and she falls in and they create clinches. And instead of working, her move is to hold, is to stop the action. And it created a very painful and ugly fight that was hard to watch. I scored the fight 93-93, a draw. Others had it various ways. If you scored the fight, credit to you because it was a tough fight to score. It just, my big takeaway was it didn't feel like a title fight. There was no sense of urgency. It didn't feel like a title fight. Just, I don't know what that means. To me, it's up there with Randall Bailey versus Mike Jones in terms of.
Well, it didn't feel like a title fight in terms of the quality of the fight, if we're just going to be brutally honest.
But I mean, the urgency too. I didn't see any urgency of, man, this fight's in jeopardy. I need to change something.
I think that Persoon had that urgency, but the way that came out was in frustration and was in trying to clown Veyre. But she really was in a tough spot. She's got a girl who's grabbing onto her every single time she throws a punch. She's got a ref who's already taken 2 points away from her, even though she's the one being held. And so she was kind of in a lose-lose, and I think she lost her cool.
It was a tough fight. It's tough break, and it's like it's kind of crappy where you win your first world title and you're booed out of the building. Like It's not great, but I mean the positive for Veyre is she's definitely going to get opportunities to fight other people because that's the type of performance where I feel like a lot of people are going to be calling to fight her.
I also think that it was a sad way to see Persoon's run end. You know, some fans may not know her, but she's been around forever. 2 classics with Katie Taylor. She's really an unsung hero of the modern era of women's boxing, and I was disappointed for her to see it end in that way.
And then Joshua Pagan, what did you think of that performance?
I really have a hard time figuring out what to make of him, man, because I see some really nice things. I see some rounds where I see a guy who understands his distance a little bit like Shakur. He knows how to take that half step back. He knows how to keep it on the outside. He pot shots. He moves well. And then I see a guy at times that just kind of shuts off and shells up and goes to the ropes and takes body punches. And then that goes downhill. You know, he kind of learned that lesson. Might have been the 6th or the 7th round of this one, where it's like when you play with your food, sometimes it bites back. You know what I mean? And I felt like that kind of happened to him in the second half of this fight. I see some great pieces, but sometimes you see a guy like a Brandon Figueroa, you don't know, like, what is it that makes him so great? You did a great video about this, where the sum is greater than the whole of the parts. With Pagan, sometimes I feel like it's less than the whole of the parts.
And I think that just speaks that he's a prospect / contender. You know, at the point he's at, he's supposed to develop, and he's not supposed to be a finished product, at least to me right now. And that's where he's at in the sport, you know? And I see a lot of good things, but he's still developing and growing. The thing I really like about him is there's a level of professionalism and commitment where you can tell he really trains hard. And that sounds hokey and corny, but I think he's going to get better because I think he has a mindset of trying to improve. And I think of all the young Salida fighters, he's the guy that can make the leap the soonest, you know, that they're doing. And he's going to get an opportunity. And I think that he's been in with real fights and real fighters.
Yeah, this guy who was fighting was no joke, too.
The question is, how does he handle that puncher? You know, because his power doesn't always show up, and what's his tools? Because like you said, that's my concern, is he does have those lulls, and against a real puncher, you don't get to have those lulls because you get caught and you're down. And that's kind of the next test I want to see him pass.
Yeah, and I think just seeing consistency, just seeing you stick to a thing for the entirety of a fight. He didn't quite have that in this one. You have to give the opponent some of that credit, but I think that's what I would be looking for, because all the good things I see, I just want to see them sustained.
Questions. We didn't get a lot today, but it's okay. The interesting thing about this fight is that if the Garcia that beat Haney then would have had, I'm going to rewrite this question. I think I know what they're saying, but I don't like the way it's written. So I think what they're saying is, if the Ryan Garcia that had his performance against Devin Haney had that performance against Rolly, then they'd be excited. But after the lackluster performance against Rolly, they're not sure who wins between Ryan Garcia and Mario Barrios. Basically, they're saying, like, if Garcia went into this fight after his performance against Devin Haney, then there would be no doubt. But seeing him against Rolly has created doubt.
I think that's a very fair take.
Next up, K Gunna. I think Dakota's a big K Gunna fan. Are you guys watching the Zuffa card tomorrow? You better believe it. I'm a boxing nerd. I actually think it's a pretty good card. Dakota, are you going to watch the Zuffa card?
I will not, brother. I cannot be doing any more streaming services. I got to be done. I'm tapped out.
Okay, so Dakota's not going to be watching. Maybe we'll work on a plan for Dakota or something to get him on those. But Dakota's not. I will. And then our guy, Toledo Trice. We love Toledo. Pagan is in the lane for Abdullah Mason, and I don't think that's going to go well. Yeah, I mean, Mason's got to come back at some point. And I don't love Pagan with punchers per se. But, you know, it's boxing. Once you become a title contender, you got to just fight who's in your way. Once you become a world champion, there's no saying, oh, that's not a good fight. Every fight's your fight because you're a world champion. So I think that Pagan's becoming an interesting figure in boxing, and that's all you could ask for. I think that's our show this week, Dakota. Oh, how does Pagan do with a guy like Andy Cruz? I think that's a hard fight. What do you think, Dakota?
I don't think he's ready for that, bro. I think that Andy is a guy that can sustain a game plan. He's very difficult to hit. You have to be so disciplined in that front foot pressure. I don't think he's ready for that.
Throw out the names of like guys that I think he's ready for. Okay. You push back if you don't like them. I think like Justin Paldo is a level of opponent that I think he could fight. Rayo, Jordan Short Dog White.
Dennis Baranchik.
Yeah, like that's the tier of guys. Those are the guys I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I want to see him in with some fringe contenders and some guys who are not maybe in a developmental or that contender / prospect state.
Okay, Dakota, say your farewells for today, and then we'll do the end of the show.
Shout out to everybody in the comments, even if it was only a few of you. We appreciate you guys. A little different. We're on Saturday here today, and we will catch you next week.
Catch you next week at the same time.
Shout out to my co-host today, Jorge Arce.
Jorge Arce. We love him. Okay, guys. We'll see you next week.